Hello friends, welcome back to our channel EduVec. In case this is your first time, please subscribe the channel and also hit the bell icon button so that you get instant notification as and when a lecture is uploaded. We have already completed the first chapter in the course. So this is the second chapter, which is acid, bases and salts. So before starting, let us briefly see what all topics we'll be covering here. I have divided this lecture into two parts so that it doesn't become a very long lecture and it doesn't get boring. So the first part will cover acid-base indicators. What are the different chemicals and compounds which can which can undergo some characteristic change to identify whether the substance is acid or base. Then reaction of metals with different acids and bases, reaction with carbonates and bicarbonates and what are their applications in the real life. Finally, the neutralization reaction, which is nothing but reaction between acid and base, and then pH and its significance. Okay, so starting with acid base indicators. As you all know, acid is something which gives hydronium ion or H plus ion, and base is something which accepts H plus ion or it gives hydroxide ion, OH minus ion, when it is put in water. Taking those properties further, let us look at key differences or some characteristic properties between acids and bases. Sorry. Let us start with the taste. So all acidic compounds generally taste sour and all bases will taste bitter. So this is a very classical definition. Coming to the color change, so litmus, which is a natural indicator, if you put acid solution in that, it will turn blue litmus to red, and vice versa with base, it will turn red litmus to blue. Turmeric, which is also a natural indicator, it turns yellow in presence of acid and it turns reddish brown in presence of base. Phenolphthalein will turn colorless in presence of acid, and base in presence of base it will turn pink. So these are the pH ranges where all these indicators work. So if you are aware about the pH ranges, I'll shortly also show you what pH ranges are. So if the pH is less than 3, it's called a strong acid. If it is in the range of 3 to 6, it's a weak acid. 7 means neutral, 8 to 11 is weak alkali, and more than 11 up till 14, they are called strong alkali or strong bases. So you can see in each of these range, one or the other indicator will work. So if you mix or if you combine 2 or 3 of these indicators so that it covers the entire range, then it becomes a universal indicator. What is highlighted here? So means for a low pH, you can use something called as thymol blue, which will turn red in acid if the pH is between 1.2 to 2.8. You can also mix it with bromocresol green, and also you can mix it with finally thymol blue, so that you have different color changes in the entire range, and it becomes a universal indicator because it is covering range from less than 3 to more than 11. So these are individual indicators which will work only in these range. The moment you mix 2 or 3 based on the requirement, you can create something called as a universal indicator which will work in range starting from less than 3 till more than 11. Also coming to some of the sensory indications of acids and bases. So all by olfactory I means it's a sense of smell. So all these three compounds or all these three materials like onion, vanilla and clove, these three will lose their smell in basic solution and they retain their smell in acidic solution. So these are also a very good or very quick way of identifying whether the compound that we are testing is a base or it's an acid. So if it's an acid, all three will retain their smell, and if it's a base, they will lose their smell. Okay. Moving on to the next part, which is reaction with metals. So generally, acid will react with metal to give a salt and release hydrogen gas. So how do you identify whether the compound is metal or not? So the compound is acid or not? You react it with metal, and then you can bring a matchbox near the test tube or the beaker where you are doing the test, and if it burns with a pop sound, which is the characteristic of hydrogen gas, you know that it's a reaction with acid. For example, if you see this acetic acid, when you react it with zinc, it forms zinc acetate and releases hydrogen gas. So if you put a matchstick near the test tube from where hydrogen is evolving, you will hear a pop sound. So that is the characteristic, and then you will know that okay, the hydrogen gas is coming out, means it's a reaction between acid and metal. Now zinc acetate is also a very common compound used in pharmaceutical industry and in medicines for treatment of common cold. So this information is also important. Now, can you write a chemical reaction between zinc and HNO3? So this is also a metal, this is also an acid. So ideally it should give a salt, which will be zinc nitrate, and it should also evolve hydrogen gas. But HNO3 being a very strong oxidizing agent, it doesn't give hydrogen. It in fact forms water as the product. And whatever is the concentration of HNO3, the products depend on that. So let me give you some examples. So first example, if you see, the strength or the concentration of nitric acid is 30%. In this case, of course, zinc nitrate is a salt, it has to be formed, it will form, and then it will release NO gas and it will form water. Similarly, if you react zinc with 60% concentrated HNO3, you will again get zinc nitrate, but this time you will get nitrogen dioxide gas. So if there is a question that zinc is reacted with concentrated solution of HNO3 and you get brown fumes or brown vapors coming out of test tube, then you know that it's NO2, because the characteristic of NO2 is it gives off reddish brown or brown colored fumes. Moving on further, what will happen if you react a base with metal? In this case also the expectation is same, it will form a salt and hydrogen gas. So this is one reaction which shows that when sodium hydroxide is reacted with zinc, it forms sodium zincate and releases hydrogen gas. But a question for you here, will all metals react with bases? There are only a particular class of compounds or particular class of metals which are called amphoteric oxides or amphoteric compounds that can react with both acids and bases. Some of these are copper, zinc, tin, lead, aluminium and beryllium. The oxides or the metal oxides which react with both acids and bases to produce salts and water are known as amphoteric oxides. So only amphoteric oxides or the compounds of metals which are listed here will react with both acids and bases, and not all the metals will react with base. So this you have to keep in mind. And like I've already said, a short recap of the definition of acid. Acid is something that donates proton or accept electron. Base is something that accepts proton. So this is the general definition of acid and base that you should remember. Now coming to the reaction of aluminium with sodium hydroxide, you can see aluminium is an amphoteric metal, so it will react with base. You are forming sodium aluminate and you are releasing hydrogen. Similarly, if you react copper with a base, you will of course form copper hydroxide, but in this case there will not be any evolution of hydrogen, you will just form a salt. So to explain, maybe this is ionic form. If I write it in compound form, copper sulfate plus NaOH, it will give you copper hydroxide and sodium sulfate. But again, copper is reacting with base only because it's a amphoteric oxide. Then similarly, reaction of beryllium with NaOH will evolve hydrogen. So the moral of this story or this slide is that only amphoteric oxides will react with only acids and base, and generally all metals will react with acids to evolve hydrogen. Some of the reactions of amphoteric oxides I would like to highlight here. You can see zinc oxide, being an oxide of zinc, it's an amphoteric oxide. When it reacts with acid, it forms zinc plus ion. It can be any salt of zinc and water. When it reacts with base, again it forms a coordination compound with zinc. Similarly, aluminium hydroxide, when you react it with HCl, it forms trichloride, and when you react it with the sodium hydroxide, it forms something like some complex of sodium and aluminium, mostly sodium aluminum hydroxide. So these reactions show that zinc oxide is reacting both with acid and base. Similarly, aluminum hydroxide is reacting both with acid and base. These are some reactions which you can try out to see that okay, amphoteric oxides are reacting with both acids and bases. Now coming to reactions with metal carbonates or metal hydrogen carbonate, the most important thing here is, be it a metal carbonate or be it a metal hydrogen carbonate, when you react it with acid, it will form salt, of course, and then instead of hydrogen here, now the gas released will be carbon dioxide. And what would be the property of carbon dioxide? Just like hydrogen burns with a pop sound, NO2 comes out with brown fumes. So carbon dioxide also has some properties. First of all, it will not support combustion. So if you light a candle near it, it will extinguish that candle. So that is one way of knowing that you are evolving carbon dioxide. Other way of identifying carbon dioxide we'll shortly get into. So just to see some reactions, sodium carbonate is reacting with HCl to produce the salt, which is NaCl, water and carbon dioxide. Similarly, sodium bicarbonate is also reacting with HCl to produce a salt, water and carbon dioxide. Now, calcium hydroxide also reacts with carbon dioxide to form calcium carbonate and water. If you pass excess carbon dioxide through it, you will convert this calcium carbonate into calcium bicarbonate. So that becomes soluble in water. So this is also, I would say, all these reactions. So this reaction is also used to identify carbon dioxide, whether carbon dioxide is present or not. So what you can do is, you can react calcium hydroxide excess with carbon dioxide. It will form a white precipitate first, and if you continue passing carbon dioxide through it, it will finally be soluble in the water. So this is one test apart from the candle getting extinguished, what I told you. This is also another test which is used to verify whether you have carbon dioxide or not. Now coming to one practical application where these reactions or reaction of metal carbonate or hydrogen carbonate is used in our daily life. So this is a soda acid fire extinguisher. Here you can see this is the handle which you have to press, and this is the safety pin. So as long as safety pin is between these handles, the handle will not move. Once the safety pin is out, when you want to use the fire extinguisher, the pin will break and this bottle will start pouring its content, or this bottle will leak out and it will start putting its content into the sodium carbonate solutions. So once sulfuric acid can and sodium carbonate, it starts reacting. So you can see we have written reaction of sodium carbonate with HCl, but here the reaction that will happen is with the H2SO4. So you can see sodium carbonate plus H2SO4, it will give a sodium salt of sulfate, which is sodium sulfate, and it will release CO2 gas. Now CO2 gas, as you know, it doesn't support combustion. So CO2 will extinguish the fire whichever is there in the vicinity. So this is the principle of soda acid fire extinguisher, and this is the nozzle, of course, from where the carbon dioxide will come out. And this is the siphon tube. So when acid and sodium carbonate get mixed here, the CO2 will siphon out from here and it will come out of the nozzle. Okay. So this is the most important, or just like what I have shown you for sodium carbonate, we also have sodium bicarbonate that can be used in presence of sulfuric acid to give the same compounds. You can see sodium sulfate, water and carbon dioxide. So this is the commonly used. We can of course use sodium carbonate also, but more common is to use sodium bicarbonate. Now a question for you to think beyond the scope of class 9 or class 10th textbook. Can you think of reason why HCl is not commonly used in fire extinguisher? You see the reaction here, sodium carbonate or sodium bicarbonate, when it reacts with HCl, it also gives carbon dioxide, right? So why don't we why don't we commonly use HCl in this bottle instead of sulfuric acid? The question is valid, but just to give you some hints, you can see the corrosion chart here. So this is the concentration of acid. This dotted line is for sulfuric acid. This solid line, what you are seeing here, is for hydrochloric acid. And this is the rate of corrosion. So as you can see, these extinguishers are typically made of mild steel or some variety of stainless steel. So when you put stainless steel or mild steel in contact with HCl, you see the corrosion rate with HCl is much faster when compared to H2SO4. So this is one, I would say, engineering justification why you are not using HCl, because it will, and fire extinguishers are stored for very long time. You might not be using them for even 2 months, 3 months or 6 months altogether. So the rate of corrosion, so this is corrosion rate per day, and if you are storing it for 6 months without using, it becomes a problem. So generally H2SO4 is used instead of HCl because the curve flattens and the corrosion rate doesn't increase beyond a particular limit. But with HCl, you can see the curve is, I would say, this 3%. As soon as the acid concentration increases, the curve rate also increases, and also the rate is pretty high. Another reason could be the health hazard, because HCl, it might also fume into chloride gas, which is a poisonous gas, unlike H2SO4, which is relatively stable. And disposal of HCl is also a problem compared to H2SO4. So these are some of the reasons why practically it makes more sense to use H2SO4 rather than HCl in a soda acid fire extinguisher. Okay. Now moving on to the next topic, which is neutralization reaction, which is nothing but reaction between acid and a base. You can see the products are salt and water. I think we have already seen this type of reactions where HCl is reacting with NaOH to form NaCl and H2O. And if you recall from the first chapter that we did, whether this type of reaction is endothermic or exothermic. So just to remind you, it's an exothermic reaction. In case you are still confused about exothermic and endothermic, please go back and watch our first lecture. Another question for you, what should be done in case of acid burns? What, according to you, should be the right first aid to give if someone has acid burns? So most of the people, or it's a very wrong, wrong idea what people have is, since it's an acid and if you put a base on it, it will neutralize the acid to form salt and water, and the effect of acid will be nullified. But what they forget is this is a highly exothermic reaction. So the moment you put base, and if you have acid burn, if you put base, there will be a lot of heat released, and this heat will only worsen the situation. It will not give you any relief. So the right first aid would be to wash it in sufficient water, continuous running water. And initially when you pour water, then also you will feel some heat, but continue washing it with water, but do not put base on an acid burn. Coming to reaction between acid and metal oxide, again same thing. Whenever metal oxide reacts with acid, it will form salt and water. To show one example, copper oxide, when it reacts with hydrochloric acid, it forms blue-green color solution. This blue-green color solution is nothing but because of copper plus 2 ions. Another practical implication of reaction of metal with acid or metal oxides with acid is storage of curd in copper vessel. So it is advised, or your mothers would have advised you never to store curd in copper vessel. What is the reason for this? So if you see this reaction, curd has lactic acid. This is nothing but lactic acid. So if this is the carboxylic acid group, C double bond O connected to OH. This is the carboxylic group, and the copper reacts with this acid to form this compound. Now this compound is not good for health. It's a poisonous compound. So as soon as you put curd in it, immediately this reaction will not happen, but slowly over the time, this compound will start forming and the curd will go bad. Okay. Now moving to what will happen to acids and bases if you put them in water. So I have already told on the very first page of this lecture that the moment you put acid in water, it will release hydronium or H plus ions. So here that's what you can see. So HCl plus water, it will release H plus ion. Now H plus ion combines with H2O to form H3O plus ion. This is nothing but hydronium ion, and chloride will exist like this. So hydrogen ions alone cannot exist. So it should be either written as H plus, in brackets you can write AQ, aqueous, which means it is in presence of water, or you can directly write hydronium, H3O plus. Similarly, bases will generate hydroxide, aqueous. So you put magnesium hydroxide and you put it in water, it will generate Mg plus 2 and 2 hydroxide ions. Okay. Now another very interesting question, which is very important from industry perspective. Water should be added to acid, or should acid be added to water, and why? What do you think would be the right justification for adding water to acid or acid to water? What is the right approach? So I'll give you some hints, and in giving these hints, I'll try to explain that why this is happening. So first is heat of hydration. Whenever you put acid in water or water in acid, hydration phenomena happens, and whenever this hydration happens, a lot of heat is released. Second would be heat capacity of water versus acid. So you know what is heat capacity from basic physics or thermodynamics. Heat capacity is nothing, the amount of heat which is required to raise the temperature of water or acid or any substance by 1 degree Celsius or unit degree Celsius. Third would be the density of water and acid. So these three when you combine these three things together, then it forms a logical explanation of why you should add water to acid or acid to water. So I'll try to explain that now. So I've explained heat of hydration. Whenever you mix acid with water or water with acid, there will be a lot of heat which will evolve out. And then second is the heat capacity of water versus acid. So water has heat capacity of 4.2 kilojoule per Kelvin. And then acid has, or for example, sulfuric acid will have something close to 1.8 or 2 times. Roughly, you can say water has twice as much heat capacity as acid. It means heat required to raise the temperature of water by 1 degree will be much more compared to acid. So it means the temperature of water will not rise significantly when you compare it with the temperature of acid. Third would be density of water and acid. Again, if you take sulfuric acid, density of sulfuric acid would be somewhere around 1.9 gram per cc or 1900 kg per meter cube, and density of water would be around 1000 kg per meter cube. So acid is definitely, or sulfuric acid is definitely heavier than water. So imagine if you are pouring water in sulfuric acid. So sulfuric acid is in a beaker and you are putting water in it. So what will happen, as soon as you put water, due to this heat of hydration and lower heat capacity of sulfuric acid, there will be a runoff reaction or a highly exothermic reaction which might lead to splashing of acid outside. So this is one reason why you should never add water to acid. Instead, it should be the other way around. You should have water in beaker and slowly you should trickle down the acid along the walls of the beaker or test tube. So what will happen, since sulfuric acid is heavy, it will try to slowly go and try to settle at the bottom. Secondly, since the heat of hydration, water has much higher heat capacity, so it will try to absorb that heat without getting splashed, because the heat capacity here is almost 2 times that of acid. Water will absorb this heat and prevent further runaway reaction. So these are, I would say, the key factors which justify that you should always add acid slowly into the water and not the other way around. I hope this is clear. If you have any doubts, just mention it in the comments. I'll try to explain it in easier terms if it is still not clear. Coming to the next topic, which is pH. pH means potens H. So potens is nothing but power or strength of hydrogen. So that is the word from where this pH is derived. Now if you look at the definition of pH, it is nothing but minus log 10 concentration of hydrogen. So A represents activity. For ideal solutions, or for solutions, for most of the solutions which are ideal, so ideal and non-ideal solutions probably we'll learn in class 12th, but right now you can replace this activity for the sake of this course as concentration. So you can say minus log 10 concentration of hydrogen ion, and if you put the minus sign inside, it becomes 1 by concentration of hydrogen ion. The factors that affect pH is nothing but temperature and activity or concentration of hydrogen ion. More the concentration of hydrogen ion, less will be the pH, because more acidic means the pH will be low. It's the other way around. Okay, so let me shortly give you an idea what activity is. Activity is nothing but effective concentration of species in a mixture. It means what is the effective concentration of hydrogen ion in a solution. So molecules, if the mixture is not say ideal, there will be interaction amongst the molecule. There might be some attractive forces which will prevent hydrogen ion from getting released. There might be also some repulsive forces. So in an ideal solution, there are no forces, there are no interaction between the molecules. So you can say activity is equal to concentration. But in non-ideal solutions, there will be interaction between hydrogen and the surrounding molecules. So the effective concentration will not be equal to the concentration of hydrogen alone. It will be a factor of something else. So the most general definition is activity, but for the scope of this course, you can also consider that solutions are ideal and activity can be replaced by concentration. And more details we'll see anyways in class 12th chemistry. So just to give some physical illustration of the numbers that you are seeing, that okay, what does pH 14 means, what does pH 7 means, and what exactly does pH less than 1 mean. So you can see battery acid or hydrochloric acid, which is concentrated hydrochloric acid, that has pH close to 0. It's not 0. It will be maybe close to 1.8, 0.9, something like that. Then moving on to lemon juice or vinegar. So lemon juice is also citric acid. Vinegar, you know, is acetic acid. It has pH around 2. then grapefruit soda around 3, coffee has around 5, then finally blood, human blood has pH around 7.4. There is a range, but this is, you can say, the average value. It should be around 7.4. Salt water starts getting basic now. So if you move up, and finally the liquid drain cleaner, which is very strongly basic because it has to clean the liquid drain. So it has almost the pH close to 40. So this is just a relative scale. You can see neutral is here 7, which is, I would say, pure water, or blood slightly basic. Blood is slightly basic, 7.4. And then strong acids are on the bottom and strong bases are on the top, with pH close to 40 and with pH close to 1, or between 0 and 1 are the strong acids. So this is just a representation chart, so that you can see that, okay, in daily life you are using all these compounds, maybe not ammonia, but you are using baking soda. You have saliva in your mouth, you are drinking coffee, grapefruit soda, juice, tomato juice also, it has a pH in range of 2.5 to 3.5. So these are some practical examples with pH values. Now coming to more examples of pH in everyday life. So the first example that I would like to give is the rainwater. So due to pollutants in atmosphere, you are seeing the vehicular exhaust or the exhaust coming out of diesel genset, or due to burning of fuels or industries. Due to any reason, there will be SO2, SO3, which is combinedly called SOx, also NO2 and NO, which is combinedly called NOx. So when these compounds, these are acidic in nature because these are non-metallic, when they react with moisture in the air or humidity in the air, they form acidic compounds. Like this can react with water to form sulfurous acid, or even sulfuric acid if the concentration is right. This can form nitrous acid or nitric acid when it reacts with water in the atmosphere. Now I would like you to write the equations for formation of sulfurous acid from SOx, and also nitrous acid and nitric acid from NOx. These are pretty simple reactions. And in case you are still struggling to write these reactions, just leave it in the comment. I will try to clarify it in the next lecture, or I will try to reply to your comment. So you can see, so it can form nitric acid and sulfurous acid in presence of water. So when the rain happens, this acidic water will come down, and it is called acid rain. Soil pH for growth. So different type of vegetables and fruits, they need different type of pH in the soil. So that is also something where pH plays a very important role. So you can see I have highlighted some pH ranges. For example, peanut will grow from 5 to 7.5, or potato will generally grow in acidic soil because it's less than 7. And you can see here also tarragon or tomatillo or watermelon. These all things are also requiring acidic soil. So soil pH also plays a very important role in growing of crops. pH of blood, like I said, the average value was around 7.5, slightly basic, but typical range would be 7 to 7.8. Then HCl is there in our stomach, it's used for digestion. And in case of acidity, we have to eat antacids, or you would have seen ads in TV also for some antacids for relieving of acidity. So they are nothing, the most common antacids are milk of magnesia or magnesium hydroxide. So this magnesium hydroxide is base and HCl is acid in your stomach. So when these two react, it's a neutralization reaction. So what will happen? There will be a salt of MgCl2 getting formed, and there will be water getting formed. So base plus acid leading to salt plus water, and the salt is nothing but magnesium chloride in this case. Finally, coming to one more practical example and significance of pH in our life is, this compound is called calcium hydroxyapatite. So this is found in our teeth, in the enamel. So what happens when there is a food stuck in your teeth? The bacterial action will start, releasing acid. So when the bacteria acts on the food, it will start releasing some acid. So acid is nothing but H plus ions. These H plus ions will react with, the hydroxides group present in the calcium hydroxyapatite, which is present in the teeth, and slowly it will start damaging the layer. So that is why you have problems like cavity, or enamel getting washed, or teeth become sensitive sometimes. It is primarily because of losing of this layer of calcium hydroxyapatite. Just to show the compound, I have shown only 2 units. Actually, it's a Ca10 unit. I have just shown one structure of it. So you can see, if H plus is here or ion comes here, it will try to take away hydroxide, or it will try to remove water from here. What can be done to prevent this? You must have seen some chewing gum ads which claim to give you fresh breath, or also the toothpaste. What they do is they will give hydroxide ions, or they will give some basic, they will ensure the basic environment in your mouth, so that what will happen, this H plus, it will be taken by the hydroxide coming from the toothpaste or from the chewing gum, rather than taking it from this compound. So that is how you try to prevent that. Let me also try to show you here. So H plus is here. This H plus will attack this hydroxide, this oxygen ion, and it will try to take away this oxygen, or it will try to form water, and it will try to leave this, and this will lead to erosion of this compound, or erosion of the layer which is protecting the teeth. Now what will happen if you are eating a chewing gum or a toothpaste? Toothpaste will supply OH minus. So this H plus, instead of attacking this, it will try to attack this hydroxide, and it will form water. So that is how the cleaning action of mouth, or the mouth is prevented from cavity if you are continuously brushing your teeth, or if some people have habit of eating chewing gums which are basic in nature. So that is the intention. So chewing gums and all, they will make the environment basically hydroxide ion, and this hydroxide ion will react with the H plus, which has come from decaying of food in your teeth. Okay, finally the honeybee sting, that is also acidic in nature. Nettle leaf, these two are acidic. It also stinges whenever the bee bites you because of presence of methanoic acid, and the pH is less than 7. Another small information about what is the natural source and what is the acid, or what is the main acid present in that. So you can see vinegar is acetic acid, CH3COOH. Similarly, orange is citric acid, tamarind or imli, that is tartaric acid, tomato has oxalic acid, sour milk has lactic acid. We also saw that in the example where I told you it's not stored in copper vessels. Lemon again has citric acid. So ant sting, nettle sting, these all things also are rich in methanoic acids. There was a question for you that what type of acids are present in grapes and apples. We consume these fruits regularly. So grapes are predominantly having tartaric acid, and apples are having malic acid. So I would like to end this lecture here, and the second part, where we will be talking about salts, we will be covering about salts, what is the water of crystallization, how to write formula of salts, how to write formula when you have an anion and a cation. So all these things we'll be covering in the lecture. So if you like this video, please give us a thumbs up, and if you have any doubts or anything which is not clear, just mention it in the comments. I'll try to cover it in the next lecture, or I'll try to answer to your comment. Thank you all for watching. That's all from my side. See you in the next lecture.